Welcome to Short Story. I'm Mr. Story, and tonight I have something strange to share with you. Some stories fade with time. Others, they wait, quietly, for someone brave enough to uncover them. Tonight's tale comes from a quiet town in Texas, a town where no one speaks of what happened on a night when two children simply vanished. This is The Twins with Empty Eyes. Now, sit back, put on your headphones, and let the story begin. Chapter 6. The Old Newspaper. The next morning, Kevin arrived at the library earlier than usual. It wasn't because he felt particularly inspired to write, but rather because something from his conversation with Sarah the day before wouldn't let him go. The library was still quiet. His footsteps echoed softly across the old wooden floor. As he neared the front desk, he saw Sarah leaning over the catalog. Her brown hair tied neatly, her face gently lit by the soft yellow desk lamp. She looked up and smiled lightly when she saw him. "You're early. I thought yesterday was just you being polite." Kevin smiled, scratching the back of his head. "Well, maybe I need to know more than I thought." Sarah didn't ask further. She handed him a worn leather-bound folder filled with old newspaper clippings carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "I found this. It's a collection of local papers from the 1980s. There's not much, but you should see this one." Kevin sat down and flipped to the page she had marked. The headline was printed in an old-style font, slightly faded. "Two children missing in the night. Abilene shaken. A pair of twin siblings, one boy, one girl, disappeared last Saturday night in the town of Abilene. Sir and Mrs. Thomas, the parents of the children, stated that they had tucked them into bed as usual. But near midnight, Mrs. Thomas discovered the bedroom window wide open, and both children were gone. There were no signs of forced entry. No clues were left behind. Police mobilized a town-wide search for several days, but turned up nothing. Residents are advised to report immediately if they see two children around 6 years old, brown-haired, wearing blue and pink pajamas, to the local police department. Kevin sat silently for a while after reading. "This is the only article?" Sarah nodded, her expression growing a bit more serious. "I've checked through the archive. This seems to be the only time the story was ever mentioned. No follow-up. No investigation updates. Nothing." Kevin frowned slightly. "Do you know the family? Do you think they're still living here?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded gently. "I don't know for sure, but I think Mr. Thomas, the father, still lives in town. Alone. I've seen him a few times, but he doesn't talk to anyone. After what happened, people say his wife left or something like that. No one really talks about it." Kevin nodded slowly. "If possible, could you take me to meet him?" Sarah looked at him, a little surprised, then smiled faintly. "You really aren't afraid of anything, are you? All right, but he's not exactly friendly. If he kicks us out, don't blame me." Kevin chuckled, but inside, the article felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples had started to spread, and nothing could stop them now. Chapter 7. The Twin Shadows. Kevin stayed at the library until the afternoon light began to fade. This time, he didn't fall asleep. Although a tall stack of books sat in front of him again, he hadn't truly read a single page. His eyes stared blankly ahead, while his mind spun with the image of the two children in the newspaper, and the two shadows he had seen before. From the front desk, a voice rang out. gentle but curious. "Are you Sarah's boyfriend?" Kevin startled and turned around. A young woman, likely around Sarah's age, stood there grinning with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Her name tag read, Alyssa. No, I'm not. I'm Kevin. Just waiting for Sarah. She's helping me with something." Alyssa nodded, eyes gleaming playfully. "Right, sure. It's just, you've been staring at her all morning. Doesn't really look like not being a boyfriend." Kevin fumbled for a response, but Alyssa burst out laughing and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, kidding. Hey, could you help me with something? There's a box of books. A bit heavy. I need to take it to the storage room, but the library's pretty empty right now. It's just me here, and I can't leave the front desk." Kevin nodded quickly, glad for the distraction. "Sure. Where's the box?" The storage room sat at the end of a long hallway at the back of the library, narrow and dim, its yellow lights flickering faintly, adding a chill to the already quiet corridor. Kevin carried the box carefully through the hallway and reached the wooden door that led into the storage room. Inside, dust blanketed the shelves. The light flickered overhead. Kevin placed the box down and let out a small breath. Then, just as he stood upright, a breeze drifted through. The door creaked slightly as if someone had touched it. Kevin turned sharply. No one was there, but something felt off. At the end of the aisle, two shadows. A boy, a girl, same height, same posture, eyes, black, empty, no whites, no expression, no motion. But Kevin knew they were looking at him. He blinked. They didn't disappear. He took a step back. They didn't move. Yet, they were still exactly where his eyes landed, always right in his line of sight. His heart pounded, not from fear of death, but because he had seen them before. Not just once, he inhaled deeply, ready to take a step toward them. "Kevin, are you in there?" Sarah's voice called from down the hallway. Kevin turned instinctively, and when he looked back, the shadows were gone. Kevin stepped out of the storage room to find Sarah running toward him. She was out of breath, eyes filled with worry. "Alyssa told me you went in and hadn't come out for a while. Are you okay?" Kevin nodded, forcing a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just got a little dizzy, that's all." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded, saying nothing more. But Kevin, he knew what he felt wasn't an illusion. And next time, they might not just be watching. Chapter 8. Mr. Thomas. The house sat quietly at the end of an old street, brick walls covered in moss, the roof sagging with age. The front door was shut tight, and the window curtains always drawn. Kevin and Sarah stood at the faded wooden gate, pressing the doorbell 3 times. "No one came out?" "Maybe he's not home," Sarah said, her voice carrying a hint of hesitation. Just then, the metal gate next door creaked open. An elderly woman peeked out, eyeing the two of them with guarded suspicion. "He doesn't see anyone. You should go home." Kevin responded politely. "We just wanted to ask about the case from years ago, about the 2 missing children. We heard Mr. Thomas might..." The old woman went quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "That story, it's true. Back then, the whole neighborhood went searching. No one could believe it. Those 2 kids were good, never wandered far. Then one night, they vanished, without a trace." Sarah asked gently, "Did they ever find anything?" "No, nothing at all. What's strange is, the whole thing disappeared just as fast. A week later, no one talked about it. The police didn't follow up. People just went silent, then forgot." Kevin frowned. Has anyone seen them since? I mean, maybe not really seen them, but maybe caught a glimpse? Shadows or something like that? The woman stared at him for a moment. She didn't answer. I have things to do. And with that, she quietly shut her door. Kevin turned to Sarah. Have you ever heard anything about black eyes? Sarah looked puzzled. What did you say? Before Kevin could answer, a sharp, aged voice called out from behind the front door. Hey, you there! They both turned. The door to Mr. Thomas's house creaked open. An old man stood in the doorway, thin, silver-haired, but with clear, piercing eyes locked directly onto Kevin. You're the one who saw them, aren't you? Kevin and Sarah looked at each other, stunned. The old man stepped aside, opening the door wider. Come in. If you've seen them, I have questions. Chapter 9. The Questions. Mr. Thomas's house carried the scent of old wood, mingled with something faintly like aged paper and black tea. There was no TV, no radio, just the ticking of a grandfather clock and an old, faded family photo placed at a small altar in the corner. Kevin and Sarah sat quietly on the worn sofa while Mr. Thomas poured tea. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were sharp. No one spoke for a while. Only the soft tick-tock of the clock and the quiet breathing of 3 people filled the room. Kevin broke the silence. I'm sorry if we're intruding. I just came across the old article, and after what Sarah told me... Thomas interrupted him. He wasn't angry, nor was he rude. His voice was simply tired, worn down by decades of hearing the same thing. It wasn't a coincidence. No one sees them by coincidence. If you've seen them, it's because they wanted you to. Kevin froze. Thomas set his teacup down and looked directly at him. Where did you see them? At the house I'm staying in, Kevin answered slowly. And once more, at the library. Sarah turned to him, surprised. The library? You saw them at the library? Kevin nodded, still holding Mr. Thomas's gaze. I saw 2 children, a boy and a girl, their eyes completely black, no whites. They didn't speak, just stood there. But I could feel it. They wanted to say something. Thomas went still. His aged hands tightened around the cup. Did they recognize you? Kevin frowned slightly. I'm not sure, but when I looked at them, I felt something strange. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like a connection. Thomas stood and walked to an old wooden cabinet. He opened a drawer and rummaged through it for a long while, then returned with something in his hands. A worn-out stuffed bear, its fur now grayish-yellow, ragged and soft from age. He placed it on the table between them. This was Emily's favorite toy, my daughter. That night she fell asleep holding it, but the next morning it was gone too. Sarah slowly reached out, resting her fingers on the edge of the table. She stared at the stuffed bear with distant eyes. I used to have one just like this. I remember if I left the house without it, I'd cry all day. Kids don't just leave their teddy bears behind. Kevin looked at Thomas and asked quietly, Do you think she left the house on her own? Thomas didn't answer right away. He was quiet for a long time. No one came into my house. No signs of forced entry. Nothing was taken, except my children. The window was opened from the inside. And then, a week later, this bear showed up again. Someone left it on the doorstep. A chill ran down Kevin's spine. If someone brought it back, that means whoever it was knew the kids. Sarah nodded silently. I think if Emily went with someone, it had to be someone she trusted, or someone who promised she'd be brought back soon. No one said anything after that. Thomas sank back onto the couch, his hands gently brushing over the worn fur of the stuffed animal. I've been searching for them for decades, but I've never seen them with my own eyes. You're the first person they've shown themselves to. I only ask one thing. He looked up, eyes heavy with a mix of hope and sorrow. Tell me how to find them again. I don't need answers. I just want to see them. One more time. Chapter 10. The Irreplaceable Object. Kevin held the teddy bear in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. Though the fur was matted and old, the scent of damp fabric and dust clinging to it, there was still something alive about it, as if it had once been a part of something real, not just a toy, but a memory. Sarah sat beside him, silent for a moment, then softly said, "I don't believe Emily would have left it behind, unless the person who took her was someone she truly knew, and she thought she'd be coming back." Kevin nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving the worn object in his hands. A teddy bear is the last thing a child lets go of. Thomas let out a long breath. His gaze drifted, as if he were reliving that night. I remember it clearly. When I realized they were gone, the room was untouched. No sign of a struggle. Only the window open and the curtain swaying. Sarah tilted her head. If someone took her and returned the bear a week later, then they either felt guilty or wanted to send a message. Kevin gently squeezed the bear. Or it was a warning. The three of them fell silent. The bear disappeared with the child, but it didn't come back at the same time. That 1 week gap? What was it? Sarah leaned down and turned the bear over. A seam on one of the legs was slightly torn. She glanced at Kevin. Neither of them said anything, but both understood. Someone took it, Sarah said quietly. Not a child. Thomas looked at the two young people sitting across from him. His eyes, for the first time, no longer looked tired. If someone returned this teddy bear, then maybe they weren't exactly missing. They were taken by someone familiar, someone very close. Kevin swallowed hard. It wasn't a new thought, but this was the first time it had been spoken aloud, and with it, the air turned thick. Sarah looked at Thomas. "Sir, do you suspect anyone?" Thomas shook his head slowly, gaze growing distant again. "Back then, I suspected many people, but no one had a reason. No one seemed guilty. And then, everyone went quiet, even family." Kevin was about to ask more, but Thomas's eyes had closed softly. "I've said enough. Right now, I just want to be alone with them." Kevin and Sarah both stood. "I'll leave my number here, okay? If anything comes to mind, just call." Thomas gave a faint, sincere smile. "Thank you. Both of you." As they stepped outside, Kevin turned back one last time. The teddy bear lay motionless on the table, but this time, it felt like another pair of eyes watching from somewhere just out of view.